This seems like such a suddenly moment. The thing that they had been waiting for and working toward, it happened in an instant. But what came before the suddenly moment is what always comes before suddenly moments of breakthrough. Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today's video, we're gonna be talking about breakthrough. I feel like breakthrough is one of those catchy words we hear a lot in Christian culture, and I think it catches our attention because so many of us desire breakthrough of some sort. I think we all long to see growth and development and movement in the areas that we're praying for and the things that we are waiting on God for. And I think it is so important to understand biblically how God brings about breakthrough and what our role in it is, because we do have a part to play. So to look at this, we're going to be taking a look at the story of Jericho found in Joshua chapter 6. And I'm so excited to get into it. Before we do, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel. I make Christian faith and lifestyle content aimed at encouraging you to know God more through His Word and to grow in His likeness, and I would love to have you here. And if you find this video helpful or encouraging, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. One other thing before we jump into it, I have to share with you this cute little t-shirt I'm wearing. It says grow in God's grace from 2 Peter 3:18, and this cute little shirt is from a company called Caruso, and I am so excited to be partnering with them on this portion of today's video. So if you haven't heard of Caruso, they create Christian apparel and gifts to help you share the good news of Jesus with the world around you. Like we're going to talk about in this video, I feel like it can be so easy to get discouraged and to lose heart when you're just in these long periods of waiting on God and praying for Him to move in your life. And so personally, I love to fill my life with reminders that are going to stir my faith. Whether that is a cute shirt like this that has a biblical, encouraging message, or putting verses up on my mirror to remind myself, things like that just really help to stir my faith. And I also love wearing shirts like this with faith messages on them because they're incredible conversation starters. I feel like they can just really create great opportunities as you're out and about to tell people about the gospel and the hope that you have in Jesus. And so love Caruso, love all of their shirts and accessories. I'm going to show you some up on screen of the ones that I picked out. I also grabbed a couple t-shirts for my dad because he loves shirts like this, and so these could also be a really incredible gift idea with the Christmas season coming up. What better way to celebrate Christmas than to give gifts that are going to point people back to Jesus, who is the whole reason for this entire season. And so if you want to check out Caruso and any of their cute faith-filled designs, you can head to the link down in my description. And thank you so much to Caruso for working with me on this portion of the video. Now let's go ahead and get into a little Joshua 6 Bible study. So if you are familiar with the story of Jericho, you probably know that it involves marching around this giant wall for 7 days, blowing some horns, and the walls came crumbling down. Most people who have heard this story maybe in Sunday school know that that is sort of the gist of it, but there's so much more to look at here, and so I want to take a look at some of the context. So leading up to this story, the Israelites have been wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years, and God is now preparing them to possess the promised land. But there's only one problem. Jericho, which was a part of the promised land, it was occupied. And so God is going to give them here some really strange instructions as to how they are going to gain victory over Jericho, as to how their breakthrough is going to come. And from this story, I want to glean some insight as to how you can know that your breakthrough is near. And I think the first thing we can see from this story, the first sign that your breakthrough is near, is that God has been pruning you. In Joshua chapter 5, right before the story of Jericho in Joshua chapter 6, God instructs Joshua, who is the leader of the Israelites at this point, he instructs Joshua to have the entire nation of Israel circumcised. Now, circumcision was a sign of God's covenant people being set apart. But the generation of Israelites who had been wandering around in the wilderness, they had not yet been circumcised. So God instructs Joshua to take care of this before they enter the promised land. Here he says in Joshua 5 verse 8, when the circumcising of the whole nation was finished, they remained in their places in the camp until they were healed. And the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. And so the name of that place is called Gil to this day. Now, circumcision is a physical cutting away, but it's also symbolic of a spiritual cutting away. I've talked a lot about pruning before. I have an entire video on John chapter 15 where Jesus talks about this in depth. But when you prune a plant, you are cutting away the dead or the overgrown parts of that plant to increase the plant's fruitfulness and growth. And God often prunes us before bringing us into new seasons or as a way of preparing us for breakthrough, because oftentimes there are things we simply can't take with us into the next thing, into the next season. Sometimes there's habits or thought patterns or sin or maybe relationships that we cannot bring with us into the new thing that God is doing. And so oftentimes He will prune us before bringing us into a new season. And that pruning process can be painful, but it isn't punishment. Jesus says in John chapter 15 that the branches that do not bear fruit He takes away, but the branches that do bear fruit He prunes that they might bear more fruit. And so oftentimes there's a cutting away, there's a stripping away of certain things in our lives before God brings us into the new thing. And we see this here with the Israelites, that God has them circumcised. He has this cutting away, but then He also allows for a period of healing before bringing them into the promised land. And a lot of times we see that same pattern in our own lives. Oftentimes when God prunes us, but then He also begins to heal us and rebuild us in Him, a lot of times that can be an indication that He is preparing us for breakthrough as well. The second sign we can see from this story that your breakthrough is near is that God is teaching you to battle spiritually. Before God allowed Joshua to lead the Israelites to conquer Jericho, He had to make it very clear to Joshua that the battle was primarily a spiritual one, so that Joshua would rely on God and not on physical things. In Joshua 5:13-15 it says, "When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, 'Are you for us or for our adversaries?' And he said, 'No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come.' And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, 'What does my Lord say to his servant?' And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, 'Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy.' And Joshua did so." I think it's so interesting that as the Israelites are about to march around Jericho with literally no physical battle happening, it probably wouldn't look like it made a lot of sense. It probably wouldn't look physically like very much was happening. Right before this, we are introduced to the commander of the army of the Lord. And I think it's just this reminder here that there was more happening than what could be seen, that beyond what could be physically seen, something spiritual was happening. A commentary I read on this verse said that by submitting himself to the commander of the army of the Lord, Joshua shows that he knows who is really in charge, and that it's only in obedience to God, his commander, that victory could be obtained, even when God's instruction might not make sense. Beyond the physical, tangible areas that we're seeking breakthrough in our lives, there's always important spiritual work at play, work that God is doing in us and through us. And so when God reminds us of this and reminds us to rely on Him and submit to Him, this is oftentimes an indication that more of His work is about to unfold. The third sign we can see from this story that your breakthrough is near is God is calling you to walk by faith and not by sight. After all this lead up, after all this preparation, in chapter 6, God finally gives to Joshua the official instruction as to how Jericho was going to be conquered. We see in verses 2-5, it says, "And the Lord said to Joshua, 'See, I have given Jericho into your hand, with its king and mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. Thus you shall do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, everyone straight before him.'" So here's God's official instructions, and honestly, God's instructions didn't make a whole lot of sense from a surface level. How is walking around a city with fortified walls going to make those walls crumble? Yet they had to walk by faith and not by sight. And what always astounds me as I read through this story is they didn't have any physical signs that the wall was about to fall before it actually did. It's not like they could see the foundation starting to crack or they started to see rocks falling down from it. And I have to wonder if they wondered on day 3, day 4, day 5 of marching around the city, is this actually going to work? They had no physical indication that God was actually doing anything for 6 whole days, yet they simply marched around the city, walking in faithful obedience to what God had asked them to do, even when it seemed like nothing was happening. Yet at this very time that it seemed like nothing was happening, God was doing everything. In verse 20, it says, "So the people shouted and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city." This seems like such a suddenly moment. The thing that they had been waiting for and working toward, it happened in an instant. But what came before the suddenly moment is what always comes before suddenly moments of breakthrough. It's what our role in all of this is. It is consistent, faithful obedience. It's obeying God even when it doesn't make sense, continuing to obey God and do what He has asked us to do even when it seems like nothing is happening. And this is what God asks us to do as well. We might not be able to see how or when God is going to bring about the breakthrough. What He's asking us to do might not make any sense at all. We might doubt that He's actually moving when we continue to walk in faithful obedience day after day, after month, after year, and no change seems to be happening. But when we do what only we can do and walk in that faithful obedience, then in His perfect timing, God will do what only God can do. He will bring down the walls that He needs to bring down so that He can be glorified and we can walk in what He has for us. So I hope that you enjoyed these little takeaways from the story of Jericho. I would love to hear from you down in the comments. What simple act of obedience is God calling you to today? I'm going to share mine in a pinned comment down below. And I also want to remind you, if you want to check out any of the Caruso Christian apparel or accessories, maybe find a few Christmas gifts in there, you can head to the link down in my description. Thank you again to Caruso for working with me on this portion of the video. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.